"It's apple pies that make the men folks' mouths water," she said. "Pies made from apples like these."
Storybugs.
Hello and welcome to Storytime. We're going to read the next chapter of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I'm glad you're here for it. This was adapted from the film by Jim Rossi, illustrated by Fernando Guel and Fred Marvin. And Snow White is home alone. Let's see what happens. Chapter 11. As soon as the dwarfs had left, Snow White busied herself preparing food for that evening. She felt it was the least she could do and repay the dwarfs for their kindness. After cutting up some carrots and potatoes, Snow White decided to bake some gooseberry pies for dessert. She was near the window and just putting the finishing touches on one of them, when a dark shadow passed over her cutting board. Snow White looked up in surprise and saw an old woman peering into the house from the window. "All alone, my pet?" asked the old woman. Why, yes, I am, but," answered Snow White, a little frightened of the strange woman. "The little men are not here?" cut in the old woman. "No, they're not," said Snow White. The old woman smiled. She said, "Making pies?" "Yes, gooseberry pies," answered Snow White, more at ease. After all, this was only a harmless peddler woman. The old woman smiled toothlessly. "It's apple pies that make the men folks' mouths water," she said. Then she took the deep red apple from her basket and held it up. "Pies made from apples like these," said the old woman. "Oh, they do look delicious," said Snow White. "Yes," murmured the old peddler. "But wait until you taste one, dearie." And she held the poisoned apple out to Snow White. "Like to try one, the old woman asked. Snow White stepped back from the window a bit, not sure of what to do. Her animal friends fretted and paced anxiously in the woods nearby. The birds had twittered in alarm at the sight of the old peddler, and now they flapped their wings in helpless frustration as they watched Snow White about to take the tempting treat. But just as Snow White reached for the apple, the birds swooped down and knocked it from the old woman's hand. Then they fluttered around her, pecking at her head and her body. Picture for it. The witch waved her feeble arms around and cried, "Oh, go away! Leave me alone!" Snow White ran out of the house and shooed the birds away. "Stop it! Stop it right now!" Snow White cried. The birds flew off back into the trees, where they perched restlessly. "Shame on you," Snow White scolded, "frightening a poor old lady." The birds hung their heads, not knowing what to do. Snow White went to the old woman, who by now was on her hands and knees recovering the apple. The princess helped the woman to her feet and then said, "I'm sorry. I don't know what has gotten into those birds. They are usually so gentle and kind." The old woman nodded absently and grasped her chest and cried convincingly, "Oh, my poor heart!" Snow White held the woman up by the arm and looked at her with concern. "Please take me into the house," the woman said. "Let me rest a while. Perhaps I may have a glass of water." Snow White nodded and took the old peddler into the house. The birds and the other animals rushed to the window to peek inside. They watched as Snow White helped the peddler woman into a chair, then gave her a cup of water. When Snow White turned away a moment, The old woman leered at them. The animals backed away and one by one scampered off to find the 7 dwarfs. The animals weren't fooled, were they? They knew exactly who she was. Oh, well, I hope you come back for the next chapter, and I'll see you next time. If you guys enjoyed reading that story, would you please click subscribe down below? We read new stories just like this one every day, and we would love to let you know when there's a new story to listen to.